Good morning to all of you following this event online. On behalf of LATO, the Latvian Transatlantic Organization, the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, and the University of Latvia, I welcome you to this event, The Future of the Russian Economy. I am moderator of this event, which means I don't have to do all that much. Rather, I can sit here and be very interested in what my three panelists will have to say in terms of this here issue that we have here today. So I have with me today Vladislav Inozemtsev, who is the director of the Center for Post-Industrial Studies. I have economist Pēteris Strautiņš from Luminor Bank, and I have from the EU Commission representation here in Latvia, Mārtiņš Zemītis. So we will get a view of the topic of today from Russia, from a Latvian perspective, and a more general EU perspective. And the idea from me was to give the floor to the three panelists for introductory remarks, say some 5 to 7 minutes to start with, then a few reflections from them on what was said by the other panelists, and then we can go to Q&A. And you're very welcome to come with your questions via Slido, and that should be possible via the connection that you have right now. Otherwise, also should be helpful with the hashtag LATO. So without further ado, I think we should simply get started on this, quite frankly, very vast topic. We have right now that, the Russian economy, of course, is hit hard by the war effort that is going on in Ukraine. It will also be very, very hard hit by hitherto unseen harshness of sanctions that is coming to the Russian economy. And with many firms moving out of Russia at the moment, I guess we're seeing also a decoupling from Russia vis-a-vis Western Europe, America, and other places. So without further ado, I think we should start with you, Dr. Inozemtsev, right? Introductory remarks. So please, what is your take on this?
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, you're absolutely right that the Russian economy has taken a very huge blow from the sanctions. And actually they are much more important for the economic development than the war itself, because all the Russian losses in this war, economic losses, direct economic losses, are, I would say, negligible if compared to other consequences, because even the Ukrainian sources are right in the Russian losses in equipment and people. They may be accounted for around from 10 to 15 billion dollars, but the Russian economy actually is suffering much more heavy losses. I would not talk about the stock market because it's simply non-existent these days. The trades are stopped, and presumably the losses are at least between 4 and 500 billion dollars, the loss of capitalization. But nevertheless, the Russian economy suffers first of all because of rupture in economic connections with the West. It's about the trade, because now we have seen that the Russian oil and gas, they are not actually eventually blocked from being sold to European Union, but United States already announced uh, announced full energy blockade of Russia. It doesn't want to buy anything at all. The discount for Russian oil, which is called euros, is now approaching around $30 per barrel on the global markets, and the Russians are struggling finding new markets for their energy resources. Of course, around 350 Western companies went out of business in Russia in recent weeks, and I think some other will follow suit. So what are the immediate implications, immediate consequences of the sanctions? First of all, they affected the Russian financial system, and this is a huge difference between the sanctions of today and between everything what happened before, because the reserves of the Russian central bank are arrested or blocked or freezed by the Western authorities. The exact amount no one knows, but it's estimated to be between 320 and $380 billion. It's a huge amount. The central bank now has no ability to, to intervene on the foreign currency market, exchange market in Moscow. So therefore, I would say the entire system of foreign exchange, which existed since early years of the Russian independence in the early 90s, is now actually absolutely disrupted. The exchange rate is artificially set up by the central bank. There is no competitive trades on the Moscow currency exchange. The capital transactions are banned. The citizens cannot take out of the country amount of more than $10,000. They cannot actually send money abroad. In some they can send it $3,000 per month, but even in this case, it would be a lot of problems to do. The Russian citizens lost the ability to pay the bills by the credit cards. If it goes to the international, for example, international service providers or international e-trade, and this will have very huge implications, because the real exchange rate, I think, is now approaching $130 rubles per dollar. So it's exactly ruble have lost between 40 and 50% of its real value before the crisis. Everything in the country becomes more and more expensive, and the price hikes are enormous, and they are actually most visible in the sectors which were serving, I would say, intermediary goods or industrial equipment. All the spare parts are now selling in Moscow, for example, from 3 to 4 times more expensive they are than they were just 2 months ago. And I would say, and I will finish with this, that the Russian economy will suffer most of all, not because of financial sanctions, but because of disruption of all production chains. Because I would say around 85% of all Russian enterprises use either raw materials or spare parts or equipment which was previously imported from the countries which impose sanctions on Russia. And therefore, I would say we will see huge loss in GDP starting from around 2-3 months from now. And my forecast for this year is GDP decrease of around 12%. Real disposable incomes will fall even more, around 15%. Of course, the budget will be in red, definitely, because the government will have to pay more money to pensioners, to state employees. They will revise the pensions several times during the year. The first revision will be on 1st of April. They are trying to raise them by 6.8%. So inflation will go up and up. I think that even by the Russian standards, Russian official statistics will show not less than 30% by the end of the year. And the most important thing I will finish with is that the Russian economy will not take a huge blow and then recover as it was in 1998 or in 2008, 2009. It will get more and more small and medium-sized blows every day and every week. And the decline, the crisis will actually aggravate month by month. So I can't see any good perspectives for this year and maybe for the next year as well.
Thanks a lot indeed for this rather apocalyptic vision that you have, I must say. But being an economist myself, I'm used to speak about billions and billions, but here we seriously had very, very many of them. What you also did with your first intervention was actually answer some of the questions we've had from Slido already. So in a sense, very many thanks for that. Pēteris, your take on this here, and also a little bit of a Latvian view, if I can ask for that.
Yes, Mr. Inozemtsev just dealt very well with immediate impacts, or in maybe 1-2 year time. I would say these events in just slightly less than 1 month, they have already created inevitable consequences that will last much longer. Yesterday I talked with Air Baltic chief, Mr. Morten, and he noted that Russia decided to keep nationalize aircraft that companies had leased from Western companies. Those lessors, mostly Irish, wanted to recall them, but Russians said, we will keep them. And he noted that after this, even if the war ends tomorrow and there is agreement to lift most of sanctions, it is unlikely that in the next 10 years any financial company will want to lease airplanes in Russia. Because well, it has shown there are lots of risks. Perhaps there will be big fight between those lessors and insurers, whether that's wartime loss or not. But it's clear that there has been loss of confidence, and so in the future for Russia it might be difficult to obtain planes even to fly in internal routes, apart from the spare part problem that might be lifted if war ends. That's one thing. Another thing, Germany is slow to change its minds, but when it happens and they set up their minds, they go like a tank, and so they have decided that they will buy less Russian energy in the future, and even if war ends, of course now it has been shown that the seller of gas and oil is somewhat dangerous, and besides, it's also an extra reason to switch away from fossils, which everybody understands it's necessary anyway. It's just an extra push. So it is clear that the market for Russian energy in Europe, and not only Europe, has been sharply reduced in the long term, and if we count those potential unreceived sums in the future, perhaps we are not talking about billions but about trillions of dollars, probably. There might be also issues with other Russian exports. I guess Russian armament manufacturers might lose markets, as it has been shown that some of the stuff they make is not really great. And what else? Of course, there will be, for a long time there will be at least a caution and willingness to export high-tech components in Russia, which could have dual use. So more or less any advanced microchips and so on, so on. So those long-term consequences are piling up, and it's really amazing in a sad way how irreversible many of them are.
Okay, thanks a lot, Pēteris. And I think the two of you so far have already been in agreement with that some of the biggest disruptions come from that Russia is being cut away from this integration it otherwise had in the world economy. Mārtiņš, a little bit Latvian or EU perspectives from your side on what's going on, or what we can expect, of course, especially.
Well, I'd like to take a little bit of a broad look and ask ourselves, why do we have the sanctions in place in the first place? I mean, Russia is waging an unprovoked, brutal war against its neighbor. The idea of the sanctions is to change behavior. So the European Union, with allies, with the United States, also in some cases with Japan, Australia, and others, have been able in record time to agree on a number of packages of sanctions, which I think, taken all told, are sanctions that are levied on Iran, Venezuela, and North Korea combined. So we're seeing a country, Russia, which was well integrated in the global value chains, which was a supplier of the world's commodities, many of the rare metals, of gas and oil, which was buying European and world products, in one day, because of its political decisions, cut off from the international system. Gradually, yes, but with once you get the ball rolling, and once, as long as the war continues, you can expect more sanctions. There are 4 packages of sanctions from the EU in place, targeted against Russia's trade, commodities, cutting off Russia's banks from the international system, SWIFT, things which we could not imagine were even possible, or that the EU would even agree to that. So we can all agree that Russia is definitely feeling the economic pain. The question is how much more pain it can weather, whether politics in this case trumps economics, because it does seem like because the war is continuing and there's more of that in fact the pain is still not trickling through. It is worth noting that the sanctions, some are arguing there are loopholes, that in fact energy commodity exports keep flowing. There are some banks which are exempt from SWIFT. You have to understand that the sanctions are targeted primarily to the elite. I mean, Putin is personally sanctioned, as are 677 other persons and 72 different entities. So they're really intended to sort of change behavior. And as long as the behavior is not changed, we can expect more sanctions. There's a 5th European sanctions package in place. But I think which is very important is this medium-term consequences, both for Russia, which is obviously suffering, but also for Europe and the United States and others, which are also suffering, because also we're not seeing the growth figures, because these parts of the world are globally interdependent. But what is happening in Europe, and I think Pēteris noted, and I think that's also very much happening in this country, is this is a reality check and a wake-up moment for the energy policy. I think Europe is now realizing its very severe dependence on Russian fossils, on the carbohydrates. In oil, 40% of the imports are coming from Russia. In gas and in oil, it's slightly less, but nevertheless important. We see that in the gas and oil prices. Europe will also suffer because of this, but so far it's willing to shoulder the pain. I think in this country, we're seeing all over Europe that renewable projects are accelerating. Germany, for instance, was willing to forego Nord Stream 2. Now they're even considering maybe even Nord Stream 1. There's all kinds of ideas and projects in place to decrease dependence and increase energy independence, which I think will have long-term consequences. But finally, I want to make one more point. I think the economic pain for Russia will be significant. But I think the long-term pain of actually both the capital flight, but also the flight of human capital, I think Russia is losing the best and the brightest. Anybody who wanted to create a high-tech company in Russia will probably not do that in the next 10 to 20 years. They'll probably do it elsewhere. And I think long term, that will be the biggest loss for the country, because essentially, yes, Russia was an economy built on the extraction of resources, but without the people, it will find it very difficult to resurrect itself. So I think this is actually doing, in a long term, extremely painful situation for the country.
Thanks a lot, Mārtiņš. And I think I will allow myself a little follow-up question to you, because we've had many questions already coming from Slido, but one for you, I think it makes a lot of sense here right now, and that is about the sanctions. Yes, they're very, very tough, and we have agreed upon them, very, very many countries, but we also know how it's like with sanctions. There's some sort of sanctions fatigue tends to come up. Is this something we can keep having, let's say, for another year? Can we agree on that in, let's say, in Europe, to keep up those quite harsh sanctions? What do you think?
I think Europe has demonstrated, at least I'm speaking on behalf of the EU countries at this point, that in fact, when push comes to shove, Europe has been incredibly united around this. Of course, this causes a lot of pain for firms, for industries, for regions, for countries. But so far, I think the brutality of the war, the images that we see every day of hospitals bombed and whatnot, have been able to mobilize the European societies and political leaders to the extent that we have not seen before. Of course, at some point, this will wear off, and I hate to say that, but some normalcy will set in. Humans are built in a way that they cannot accept living in constant stress. They somehow get used to the situations. But I think this is such a challenge to the security order in Europe and to sort of the way of life and sort of international norms, that I think there is still quite a bit of way that the countries can go. I think the governments are now quite seriously considering banning Russian oil, which is slightly easier than gas. I think there is consensus emerging towards that being included in the fifth package of sanctions. We shall see. With the gas, I think we've seen last week's European Commission announcement that the countries should move towards reducing two-thirds of dependence on gas by the end of this year. So I think as long as the aggressor keeps up the pressure in Ukraine, it seems like in the near term, political consensus has been quite strong, and it's been quite amazing to witness that in Europe.
Thanks a lot. And then back to you, Dr. Inozemtsev, with some more questions that we have from Slido, and where I think that you're in the right position perhaps to answer those questions. And that is also this year, how long do you think these sanctions will continue? But also, what's life going to be like for, say, the ordinary Russian in the months or perhaps years to come?
I will react also for some thoughts provided by other participants. First of all, I will answer your question about how long it can last. I think it can last for a long time, because the most important issue these days is whether the sanctions can change Putin's policies. And my answer will be definitely no, they can't. Because in economic issues, Putin looks highly irrational. It values politics well above all economic issues and considerations. And so my point now is that any kind of sanctions imposed by the European Union or United States will not change his ability and his willingness to go further forward with the war in Ukraine. Putin can be defeated only with war efforts from Ukrainian side, and I hope it will happen. But once again, just for being very straightforward, the sanctions will not change Moscow's policies at all. What can change actually, and here we come to the issue of how long the sanctions will be in place, because the problem from my point of view, the problem for the West is not about with how long the Western countries can keep pressure on Russia and how they can intensify the sanctions. The most important issue now is whether the sanctions can lead to some kind of rupture of conflicts inside the Russian elites. And I would mention here a very important thing, because when the sanctions, as you mentioned, now are affecting also Mr. Putin and Mr. Lavrov and the complete all the people inside the Security Council, all the people inside the State Duma, the lower house of parliament, the Federation Council, the upper house, it actually makes a very huge change in Russia, in the consciousness of Russian elite, because now it creates a situation when everybody is, as we used to say, in one boat. Everyone is sanctioned the same way, even Mr. Putin, and therefore there is no message sent to Russia what the Russian elite should do and what their fate and their consequences can be. So I would advise to change a little bit the accents, because as you absolutely clearly mentioned, what we are seeing now is a series of war crimes in Ukraine during this unprovoked war waged against a peaceful nation. And now I think the next step should be introduced while Mr. Putin, Mr. Shoigu, and many generals in the field should be really declared war criminals. And then, if the West produces such a message, if the tribunal on crimes in Ukraine is set on, in this case, the distinction can once again come into existence, the distinction between Mr. Putin and other war criminals and other members of the Russian elite who are not designated as such. And then, actually, the next step might be that if you can say that if Mr. Putin, Mr. Shoigu, and 20 generals arrive to The Hague, the sanctions are lifted next day. And this will be actually a huge provocation against the Russian elite, because they will see what is the consequences of changing the regime. Because the sanctions are not about changing the behavior. They should not be about changing the behavior. It should be about the regime change. Since Mr. Putin is in the Kremlin, the war will go on, the confrontation with the West will go on, and actually nothing general will change. And the last small question is about how long the Russian citizen can survive this, and what may be the consequences. I would argue that they can survive it indefinitely long, because of course the quality of life, the real disposable income will go down this year, but they are several times higher than they were in late 90s. And the people, they are not feeling that the situation is so desperate that they should somehow revolt. Actually, the economic hardships never produced a political response in Russia. And this is a big problem for this country. It's not Europe in this case, because the people will try to get other jobs, to pay less taxes, somehow to survive, but they will not protest in huge numbers against the economic problems. This is for sure. They can protest against the war, they can protest against the irregularities in elections, but not about economic issues. This is, I think, quite for sure. And so therefore, and the very last point I would make is that now the situation is different from the crisis, for example, of 2008, because the most affected people in Russia by this particular crisis are is the urban middle class and the upper middle class, because its quality of life, its habits are completely changed these days, while the pensioners, the state employees, the people in the provinces are much less hit by this crisis, because their wages and salaries will go up with the indexation, which Mr. Putin will definitely provide. The inflation on consumer goods, on food, is less than, for example, on computers, electronics, automobiles, and whatsoever. And so therefore, I would once again reiterate that the sanctions are very useful. They absolutely, for sure, undermine the long-term ability of Russian economy to grow. They create huge obstacles for the foreign investors to come in. Everything of this is right. But for changing Russia, I think much more serious steps should be taken, aimed and directed on Putin personally and on the regime change, rather than on the change of attitude to the people.
Thanks a lot indeed, right. And Pēteris, I would like to come back to you. There was a question here about, according to President Zelensky in Ukraine, he has asked for many of the ports to be closed. But if that should happen, it definitely has an impact here on Latvia. But also in general, what do you see will be sort of the main impact in this year, 2022, on the Latvian economy from what is going on?
I think that the biggest impact might be some damage of investment and also tourism, because of the general perception of insecurity in the region. It is largely about perception versus reality. One thing, there is a war in Ukraine, and wars can escalate. They have their own dynamics. That's bad news. There are also good news, like the coming rearmament of Germany, mobilization of NATO alliance. Sweden and Finland maybe not becoming parts of NATO, but moving closer. And general weakening of Russian armed forces, and so on. And their bad experiences in Ukraine, you can argue that actually Latvian security has improved, but never mind, images and perceptions are what they are. So there might be some negative impact on investment and tourism on Latvia. Trips to Baltic states are already being, group trips are being cancelled. What else? Of course, there is some direct export exposure. Russian market was quite important for Latvian pharmaceutical industry, about 1/3 of total, plus markets in Belarus and Ukraine. For some machinery businesses, it might be game over. This war, I can think about 2 of them, which are pretty large ones. Of course, Latvian railway traffic.
Give us some names.
Yeah. No, I will not call them.
Okay.
But
Fair enough.
I'm banker. But also Latvian railways, you can expect that their traffic will continue to decline, and it looks like Latvian railways become state-financed state department, like it is in most countries in Europe. So far, Baltic railways were unique. They were actually making money even from infrastructure, which is unusual. It will not be the case anymore, and definitely also impact on ports. Impact in Latvia is highly concentrated. It's around Riga and around Riga. There are those affected manufacturing companies, and also Latgale, where most Latvian railway employees work, plus there are some exporting businesses affected by the war, and also to some extent Ventspils. But Ventspils has done a lot to prepare for that. For Riga, it doesn't matter so much. It's a big, diverse economy. I'm more worried about Latgale, which is already quite poor and lacks development perspective.
Thanks a lot for this. And again, looking at the questions coming in and trying to juggle them, that's a little bit difficult because there are many of them, but keep them coming. It's very welcome indeed. Back to you, Dr. Inozemtsev, because somebody has been asking about how likely is it that Western businesses in Russia will be nationalized? And I will allow myself another question, even though it's not really in any way or form the same, but you mentioned this year that pensions will be increased in Russia and possibly several times. Where does the money come from? Are we thinking about a country where money printing will be the end game?
Okay, thank you. So the first question was nationalization.
Yeah,
look,
nationalization, yeah.
Look, this is a very politicized question, and of course anyone is commenting on it. I wouldn't say, as for now, it looks a realistic option that entire assets of the Western companies will be nationalized, because there are 2 issues here. First of all, many Western companies who are declaring that they are moving out of Russia actually don't move out. So there is no, the warehouses are locked. The people who were employed in several Western companies like IKEA and many others are just being paid for several months. So I would say that it's not about complete rupture with Russia or complete withdrawal. It's about wait and see approach, which in some cases is definitely, the companies say we are leaving. In some cases, it's not so straightforward. But anyway, I would say that for Russians, there is no any idea to nationalize them immediately, because the Russians still, as for now, they are pretending that there is business as usual. For example, it was a lot of rumors that the Russians will default on their obligations even in March, but the coupon was paid on the 16th. It will be paid on the 31st of March. Gazprom and Rosneft repaid around $3.3 billion in foreign debt just last week. And on the 4th of April, there will be another Eurobonds of the Russian Federation due to be paid, and for $2 billion, and it will be paid. So therefore, I would say that for several months, the situation is unclear about nationalization. I would say it will not happen, but nothing is excluded for later periods. What about where's money coming from? I would say that now it's not so big deal because actually, yes, the reserves are arrested of the central bank. It's enormous sum of money, and I would say, from my point of view, Russia will never recover it because I think in the end it will all go for reparations for Ukraine and for the restoration of Ukrainian economy. But nevertheless, one should realize that this money were actually virtual for all these years. They were not working in the Russian economy. They were deposited in the Western banks. So if they are arrested, formally it changed nothing. And the money from gas and oil exports is still coming in. The Russian central bank now ordered 80% of all this money to be sold immediately for rubles. So they are recovering some part of the assets every day, every week. The banks were very solvent, and they had a very good last year with a huge profits. And overall profitability of business enterprises was at record high. So there is a lot of money in the country, and budget is still running small. It's in green, so it's for the taxes which are collected are more than the money which is spent. So I would say that the budget is okay. It seems to be okay even for the next quarter at least. Of course, the debt in Russia, it's a very low levels. It's less than 20% of GDP. And even I'm suggesting that the Russian government should borrow more. It will not be a huge deal when inflation would be around 30%. If the borrowing of 5-6% of GDP adds maybe 3-4 percentage points to inflation, it will not change the overall picture. So I think that as for this year, the Russian government is absolutely safe, is absolutely comfortable in the sense of financing the allocation of money and all the social programs. So I would say that as for now, it's not a very big problem. If, for example, the oil and gas exports will be cut in some months to come, yes, it might be of growing importance. But now it seems that everything is fine, and the Russian government produces signals that the debts will be served. It will be no 1917 nationalization. And actually, they are not trying to return to the Soviet planned economy because actually the private character of the Russian economy, the vibrant private enterprises, they are the best possible guarantee for the economy will not collapse. Because actually the crisis of 1991 and the following years was coming just from the planned economy of the Soviet Union, which was not prepared to work in the market surroundings. Yeah. But now I would say that the entrepreneurs will do their best to survive, and this will actually keep the economy afloat for some time. I'm not a very huge pessimist about this. I would say that in months and years, the Russian economy will go down, and Russia is of course a declining power, not a developing economy. But nevertheless, it will not create an economic catastrophe, which will result in a kind of popular uprising or just destabilization from below. I don't trust that.
Thank you very much for this insight. And Mārtiņš, coming to you then, I would also like to hear if there were some views in the EU about this possible nationalization. And the second question will be coming back to the questions that have come in from Slido. What about countries that might help Russia, friends in the Middle East, friends in China? EU views on that?
Yes, well, of course, don't have a crystal ball, and I don't know what goes on in Putin's head. For now, I agree with Professor Inozemtsev. I think that the president of Russia's central bank and the Minister of Economy, they've been trying their best to keep the economy afloat, given the very dire situation. I'm not sure I agree wholeheartedly that Russia can borrow so easily and so freely on the markets. I think it will be extremely difficult where it will be borrowing from. I mean, maybe China, and that's to answer your question. Of course, Russia has not lost, unfortunately, all friends in the world yet. It has some friends. Some are trying to use that. I think there is an interesting story with India, which, of course, is still buying Russian coal and oil at a discounted price. So this can change the calculus somewhat, depending on what some of the other powers do. If they provide a safe haven, if they continue to buy Russia's resources. On this nationalization point, of course, that's a tricky point. It's a highly political question. It's not an economic question. I think that's some ways the way of threatening Europe. That in fact this might be the counter sanctions, because we have not really seen all that much in terms of Russian counter sanctions. Yes, they've sort of accepted that this is what's happening. They've been sort of sending some signals, mulling some options, but we have not seen much in terms of concrete counter sanctions. And I think as long as the oil and gas keeps flowing, they are in a relatively comfortable position. So I think increasingly there will be a consensus in Europe, at least, to curtail those exports, or at least oil. Other parts of the world, we've seen Saudi Arabia has said that they will not, necessarily come to the world's to save the world with higher oil output. We've seen, signals here and there. It may change the picture somewhat, but I wouldn't. EU is also working with many powers. German minister was just in Qatar, agreeing on the supply of LNG. There's all kinds of contacts to see. In the short term, there's contacts with Azerbaijan as well, because they have an ability to ramp up some of the hydrocarbon exports for alternative routes. So of course, Europe is looking for alternative supply options, for alternative sources of energy to be able to wean itself off the energy dependence. How it will play itself out, it's anybody's guess. I was listening to Professor Inozemtsev, and initially I thought his picture was very gloomy. And then, in the second intervention, I gathered that, in fact, in the short term, Russian economy can survive. And I think in some ways it may survive, and I think it's incredible, the resilience of the Russian people, towards economic hardships, and also, the connection between Putin and the elites. I think a lot of the idea of putting on the sanctions is predicated on the fact that, in fact, there will be enough pressure on the economic elites that they would sort of change behavior. And we're seeing in the short term, it's not happening. So the idea is to ramp up sanctions again. But I think also we need to talk about not only sanctions on Russia, but also, you said, and I like that very much, that in fact the fate of this war will be decided in Ukraine, on the battlefield. So that's why it's very important also from European side, from American side, to not only put sanctions on Russia, but also support Ukraine as much as possible in the war effort and also economically. And we've seen the first time in history, the European Union, in fact, from the European Peace Facility, ironically, has provided 500 million in terms of military aid to Ukraine. And there's more coming on the top of the humanitarian aid, and also 1.2 billion, which is disbursed in tranches to support macro-financially support the Ukrainian economy, because ultimately the fate will be decided on the battlefields of Ukraine. And we know from history of European of Russian army, where the army stands, there is the Russian sphere of influence. So that's extremely important also to be aiding in not only putting pressure on Ukraine, but also aiding as much as possible. And I think the EU has been, doing exemplary effort in helping Ukraine. And, one day, the war will be over, and there will be reconstruction effort. And I think that's quite clear that yes, it will need to be sourced in some ways, from the capital that the West has, Russian capital, but also, of course, it will be a lot of European money that will go eventually into Ukraine, into reconstruction efforts.
Thanks a lot, Mārtiņš. And I think we take a follow-up question to you, also coming from the audience, and it's about the green transition. I think it's very obvious that this will be speeded up by now, but what are sort of the practical steps in the context of the green transition in Europe?
I think this is a very, very important point. I think now we see that if the green transition in Europe had happened 5 years, 10 years, or 15 years ago, there'll be less dependence on Russia for the fossil resources. Europe would be in much better shape. So this gives a new impetus for the European Green Deal, for the green transition, for investments into renewables, into wind energy, solar energy, heat. Some countries like Belgium, for instance, is deciding now to keep the nuclear stations, longer open for longer. I think we'll see a lot of investments in Europe, much more investment than it was planned before, to go into various green projects, decarbonization projects. I think we saw in Netherlands, overnight, they will double now the capacity of installed wind power by 2030. In this country here that we're sitting, there are discussions now on the LNG terminal in Skulte. There are now renewed discussions. It's on the table. The politicians have put this discussion on the table about nuclear capacity as a sort of balancing power. And I think we're seeing lots of programs in different countries to really beef up solar panels on private homes, heat pumps, electric mobility, to lessen the dependence on the fossil fuels. I think it will be given new impetus. There will be new rationale for this, not only good for the planet, but also as energy independence, as energy security measure, as a way to be more independent from an unreliable power. Maybe not so much economically, because the gas and oil still keeps flowing, but politically. I mean, this is becoming toxic. Any type of relationship with Russia is becoming toxic. Be it in finance, be it in trade, be it in energy support. That's why we see so many Western companies. Yes, I agree. Maybe some of that is a bit of a marketing ploy, because there's lots of pressure on the corporate world to be seen as leaving Russia. But then we really, the stories are that employees are kept paid, and there's some goods in the warehouses remaining there. But I think overall, in terms of the global business environment, I think it's becoming very, very clear that any types of relationships in Europe with Russia is becoming something which is hard to fathom. So in a medium term, I think this crisis, unfortunately so, it did not have to come to that. It did not have to have thousands and maybe tens of thousands of lives lost in Ukraine to give new impetus to the European Green Deal. We should have realized in Europe that in fact this is brings a higher quality of life for us all, even though it requires a lot of investment. But I think you're right. It just adds currency. It adds arguments. Why we should do that much faster now when we have this war in Ukraine.
Yeah, and therefore a little bit sad that later we have to think about why did we need such a strict wake-up call in order to bring it forward. But there we are. Please, yeah.
Just a very, very small remarks about your talks about how Russian government can finance its debt. Look, the problem is not about that the Russians should borrow in China or in Arab countries. The Russian central bank actually has been a unique institution which doesn't resemble any kind of Western central bank, because before the crisis erupted, just imagine, for example, if you look on the ECB or Federal Reserve, both these banks, they have some kind of hard currency reserves on their balance sheet. And in the US, the share of these reserves in the Federal Reserve balance sheet is around 4%. In ECB, it's around 8.5%. In the Russian central bank, before the crisis, the share of foreign reserves in the balance was 81.3%. It was just, a money box. It was not a central bank at all. In the United States, 64% of assets of the Federal Reserve are the treasuries. So the Federal Reserve gives loans to the Treasury Department, to the Minister of Finance. In Russia, the Russian central bank before the crisis have on its balance sheet 0.6% in Russian treasuries. So it's very easy, to increase the borrowing via the Russian banks, than to put these treasuries into the central bank as a collateral, and therefore it's actually a domestic borrowing. It's very easy to do. Moreover, I would say that the law on the Central Bank of Russia in Article 26 states that 75% of the profits of the central bank next year goes to the budget. So therefore, it will be very technically easy issue to do, and to borrow 5-6% of GDP is not a problem at all for several years to come. And the last also remark, it's about the sanctioning the wealthy Russians, oligarchs, as they're known. Actually, I see all the all the events of the last weeks, when the super yachts, the mansions in Europe, they are arrested everywhere. That's a good signal. But I would say that, from my personal point of view, these people, they are of course guilty of what is going on in Russia, but nevertheless they cannot influence Putin because they don't control his money. There are many special people who do this. Like after Panama Papers surfaced, it was a musician called Roldugin, who appeared with $2 billion, and I think there are tens or dozens of Roldugins around Putin, but not Abramovich or Deripaska control his money. So therefore, it's much more is to be done investigating Putin's wealth, not the oligarchs' wealth, because it's quite different things, I would say.
Hey, thanks a lot for this. I will come to you then, Pēteris, because I always admire sort of your economic insight, and I like this idea that you sometimes put a sort of philosophical twist on it. So please indulge me right now when I want to ask you, with what we're seeing right now with Russia, right, with the sanctions, possible nationalization, are we seeing that Russia will become a different type of economy, that it'll be more, shall we say, not more Soviet, that's not what I mean, but less of a market economy? What do you think? I mean, it's not an easy question, I know that, but that's why I'm asking, basically. Are we seeing a permanent transformation of the Russian economy?
I think perhaps not in that sense. Of course, some key industries like energy and so on, they will remain to be largely state-controlled as they have been. But speaking about other things, most manufacturing, most services, I think the current Russian government is not, its economic philosophy is not Marxism, Leninism, communism. I think their problem is so-called Eurasianism, but they are not communists. They don't believe in centrally planned economy, and they understand that period in Russian history when it was communist economy. Actually, it weakened Russia very, very significantly, and more or less, I would say, even permanently. It's great fun to think about alternative histories. Of course, it's very, very soft science, not science at all. But you can easily imagine that if World War I didn't start, Russia would be, well, at that time it was not a very rich country and it was not liberal democracy, but definitely it was moving in the right direction and very rapidly. Actually, this place where we stand, it was a special economic zone for Imperial Russia, and it was for 20 years before the First World War were absolutely great for Latvia. Actually, it's by far the best period in economic history of Latvia. But this October coup d'état, it more or less destroyed it.
Territory of Latvia.
Yes. That destroyed everything and damaged Russia economically, demographically, also just destroyed moral values and so on. So the current Russian government, they are not communists. They are conservative imperialists. So you can call them like that. But speaking about long-term perspectives again and how it looks from Latvian side and what might be the impact of Latvia. Okay, now Morten, lyrical off-topic for you. Recently I bought a telescope for my kids for watching stars, and then I went to a web page called lightpollutionmap.com, where you can see light pollution levels. I checked out where in Latvia you can see stars the best, and where it's not too far from Riga. For Latvian viewers, it's from Riga, the closest place is just outside Vecumnieki village. But then I looked also at broader picture, and I noticed, I was really stunned that that part of Russia, which starts about 50 kilometers from Latvian border and stretches almost to the suburbs of Moscow, is strikingly dark. It's dark. There is dark age in that part of the world. Nowhere else in Europe, apart from very far north, you have light pollution level as low as it is in those parts of Pskov, I guess also Smolensk Oblast. Why it is so? One explanation could be that was a part of Russia that was occupied by Germans during the World War II, and that was genocidal war, no doubt about that. But another thing, of course, is that that in Russia, well, over long periods of time, the performance of the economy has been quite weak, and there has been a lot of neglect of countryside, of деревня, maybe Russia, Moscow looks very bright on that map, but just outside Moscow, until Latvian border, there is darkness. Also Tver Oblast, Tver region. And yes, who said that Russians are very, in their way, they are very resilient. But on the other hand, Russian society and economy doesn't seem to be that resilient at all, because it has suffered a lot for a very long time. And this is another crisis it didn't really need, frankly. So now money that could be spent for reviving those areas, it's being spent on weapons and so on. Young people who could rebuild these areas are getting killed. Long-term perspectives are severely damaged, as we discussed, and so on. And so in the future, we are here in Baltic states, we are looking like at a dark, big zone of zero, almost zero economic energy just across our border. And that is that is kind of sad, maybe also a little bit dangerous in a way, because you have this huge area where people are quite poor. Their average salaries with the new exchange rate are what, maybe 400, 500, perhaps not, about $400 or even less in euros, about third what it is in the Baltics. And yes, so perhaps it's not really dangerous. As I said, Latvian geopolitical situation actually has not worsened recently. Maybe it has even improved if you look very carefully. But yes, for in Soviet times it was so that Sweden and Germany seemed somewhere very far away, but Vladivostok was just besides. And now it's totally opposite. We are very open to Europe, but just outside Latvian borders there is a zone of emptiness.
I asked Pēteris for some philosophical input, and I'm definitely not disappointed. Thanks a lot indeed. I think it was a good one. I'm looking at the time also, and as a moderator, I'm usually supposed to sort of wrap up, but I find it very difficult to do today because we have been dealing with all sorts of areas. So rather, what I would like to do at the end here is ask my panelists to sort of point out very reasonably briefly sort of what they think are, shall we say, three most important takeaways in terms of the future of the Russian economy. Not an easy question to give to you, and I'm sorry about that, but that is also sometimes the moderator's job. So if you would sort of point at what do you think the three most important things we should take away with us today about the possible future of the Russian economy?
Look, I would say that the future of Russian economy looks badly, very bad. I used to, to remind of a situation like, for example, you have a military warship and it is struck by a torpedo from a submarine or by two torpedoes, and actually it is hurt very, very, very strongly, and it's sinking actually, and the staff, all the people on board, they are trying, to take the water out and to do something to keep it afloat, but it is sinking, and it doesn't make a huge difference whether you will shoot the third torpedo or not. It will sink, but not tomorrow and not immediately. So the Russian economy is going down, but it will take, from my perspective, several years to be not completely, but gradually destroyed. The Russian economy is resilient because it's quite primitive, and when the crisis hits economy, it hits any economy in the hardest way if the economy is more developed than another one. And so with around 60% of all disposable income in Russia being used for buying food and to pay utility bills, it's quite hard to destroy such an economy. You can destroy everything which was high-tech elements of this economy, export-oriented industries. They will be destroyed in months. But in general, it will actually keep afloat. And the last point is that, from my perspective, I would say that the West should now take the next step and to say clearly that it's not about destroying Russian economy, it's about changing the Russian political regime. And this is actually what can stop war in Ukraine, which can actually make Europe more secure, because with the current regime in Russia, you will never feel yourself secure. It's like Saddam Hussein in Baghdad. Even he lost half of the country in the war of 1991. Still, he was there. It was more and more disturbance for the wider world. If Putin is in his place, you will never be safe.
Very good. Thanks a lot. Mārtiņš, 3 key points. Not easy, I know.
I have 3 points to make, and these 3 points are pain, economic pain, and more economic pain. I think there's no good solution. Unfortunately, it's Russia's own doing. They have put themselves in a box, and very difficult to come out of the box. I think in the short term, we will see the impact of the sanctions amalgamating. I think there'll be only more economic pain coming as long as the war rages. In the medium term, I think we'll see economies which were dependent or trading with Russia or doing investment, looking elsewhere. I think it will take some time, but it will definitely happen. And third, in the long term, I think, and Pēteris, I think, made a very good point that Russia, in fact, had not had its cohesion policy like we've had in the European Union. It was extremely unequal in terms of, as a society, and also in terms of geography. And I think in the long term, unfortunately, this will mean less funding, less capital, less ideas for modernization of Russia, to emerge from this primitive state into kind of a more sophisticated state. And for that, they need know-how, they need capital, they need technologies, all of which will be in short supply. Let's just see microconductors, chips. With that, unfortunately, the modern economy does not work, and Russia is not seeing its supply of chips. So I can only say pain, and more pain. And of course, it is not the intention of the West to primarily to hurt the population, the people, the economy as such, but to change behavior. Unfortunately, there is collateral damage. Sanctions are not a precision-guided caliber missile. When you hit the country, unfortunately, you also hurt people outside of immediate realm of decision makers. So more pain to come. And unfortunately, this is what sanctions mean for Russia.
Thank you, Mārtiņš. Some final remarks from you, Pēteris? Doesn't have to be so philosophical this time, but
it's difficult to add anything. So yes, Russian economy resilient. It is reasonably resilient in the short run. In a favorable political scenario, of course, we see a partial lifting of sanctions and so on. But anyway, long-term impact of recent decisions will remain in any scenario, and for Latvia it means that more and more of its economy will be linked to west, north, south, but not east. Actually, there is, by the way, very little economic cooperation still going on, some, but that doesn't have great perspectives. Even if sanctions are lifted, there will just not be much economic activity and income across our eastern border.
Very good, thanks. And I think I will therefore not add very much extra, but I would like to take one more point up that has also been added during the discussion, but that I think is really important, perhaps coming from that I'm a sort of educator myself, and that is the impact on human capital. Mārtiņš, you mentioned it, right? It is sad to see, right? This here could have most likely will have a very long-lasting impact also on the economy, together with this here more or less destruction of the middle classes. Thank you very much indeed, panelists, for being here today. I think we put a lot of balls into the air and a lot of things, and I should sit here and try to juggle with it. I don't think I was very good at that. It really went all over the place, and that was very good. Thank you very much to the audience also. I got a ton of questions, and you didn't get answers to all of them. We simply didn't have the time for that. But very many thanks for joining us, and once again, many thanks to the panelists for being here with me today. So thanks a lot indeed, and bye for now.